Welcome to the Mr. Mac podcast, y'all. We are big on lucky number 7 here because there has been so much chatter going on about Apple Intelligence and everything that it could mean for us. And then the response, which is why don't I have it right now? And that's not only from us as the consumer, but also Wall Street, very disappointed with Apple. Their ticker just this morning down another 3 points. I don't think I've seen them below 200 in a couple of years. Actually, let's just throw that up right now. And okay, all right, to be fair, they were sitting at the 193 mark right in like the beginning of June, the beginning, late May, which was just like a few days before WWDC of 2024 when they got a massive run in their stock price. From there all the way through, let's see, they went to 230 in a couple of days. So really no surprise to see big bumps there because we saw so many incredible things demoed. And by demo, I really just mean displayed, not a full tech demo that people could use, but just the WWDC recording of the promises of the future. But guess what? That stock price all the way back down to 191. So just a tick from where they started, an amazing AI run, higher than it's ever been, peaking at 255 in December, and then a plummet dropping over 25% in just a few weeks. So yeah, big desires here from anyone who holds a little bit of Apple stock and anyone who holds an iPhone that we can actually see the piece that we can actually see the promised future that Apple Intelligence has been shown to make possible. But right now there is a flurry of people on YouTube and blogs and CNET and Bloomberg and all of these guys basically tearing apart Apple based upon the stories of an internal struggle, an internal tearing of leadership and directive failures, citing all kinds of turmoil inside of top Apple leadership, saying that the Siri team didn't follow through on anything besides making Siri response times shorter and making Hey Siri go to just Siri, which I actually like. But of course, all of that so far behind what we're seeing from AI-specific companies like OpenAI and then other companies that have really thrown everything in terms of resources all the way down to hardware and quantum chip development like Google. So what does that mean for us? What happens when the world's most powerful tech company chooses, and here's the key to this entire episode, privacy over progress? And we're actually going to see that as well in this deep dive where we explore why Apple is falling behind in the AI race and whether it's a strategic decision or the results of decisions made over the last decade. And not just, as we're suggesting here in this show, what we're seeing the current public story of all just internal dysfunction. If you've ever wondered why Siri stumbles all over herself while ChatGPT writes code and poetry, you're not alone. We're going to be breaking down the cultural, the technical, the leadership challenges inside Apple that are making it harder for them to compete, and what might be next coming with iOS 18, and even now, in a few weeks, iOS 19. Now, you may know the format of this show where we have some AI agents actually go in, investigate, and pull out all the details so that you can understand the technical side of exactly what's been going on. So we're going to move them up to the front of the show this time because this is such a highly technical topic. And then I'll be back in order to dive into what this really means for us as the end user. Take it away, guys.
It's hard to miss all the talk around Apple Intelligence. And let's be honest, some of the early takes on the way they're rolling it out, well, they've been pretty pointed.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You hear those whispers, sometimes louder than whispers, asking if maybe the timing points to, some issues upstairs in Cupertino.
Right, that leadership question. It's an easy narrative to grab onto, for sure.
It always is with these big tech moments, isn't it? Especially when something this hyped doesn't just, appear fully formed overnight.
Exactly. But today, we're going to dig a bit deeper because while that leadership angle's out there, our look at the source material suggests something else is really driving this. A huge factor seems to be Apple's fundamental commitment to privacy. We're talking end-to-end encryption, keeping stuff on your device whenever possible. So maybe it's less about leadership fumbles and more about, well, tackling some seriously tough tech challenges deliberately.
I think that's a much more accurate picture based on what we know. It's not like flipping a switch. Imagine trying to build Fort Knox, but Fort Knox also has to think and learn super fast, all inside your phone.
Okay, Fort Knox in your pocket. I like that.
And Apple's own research, that the stuff about combining machine learning and homomorphic encryption, it explicitly states on-device first. That's the baseline.
So let's unpack that on-device thing a bit more. We kind of get it, but why is keeping the processing local, on your phone or Mac, such a big deal for privacy here?
Well, the crucial part is minimizing how far your personal data travels. When the AI heavy lifting happens on your device, your photos, messages, app usage patterns, it just doesn't need to go to Apple's servers or anywhere else to get processed.
Oh,
It stays with you, under your control, basically. Think of it like whispering a secret in a vault versus shouting it across a stadium.
makes sense. And this isn't exactly new for Apple, is it? I mean, looking back at their iCloud security documents, they've been talking strong encryption and strict policies for ages.
Absolutely. Security is like baked into the Apple DNA. And look at iMessage, for instance. That whole blog post about PQ3 quantum-resistant encryption.
Yeah, I saw that.
It highlights how they're constantly upgrading security, but it also reminds us they've had end-to-end encryption by default since 2011. That shows you how deep this privacy commitment runs. They're already prepping for future threats.
So privacy isn't just a feature, it's foundational. Which brings us right back to our main question for this deep dive. How do these core privacy principles, especially this intense focus on doing things on the device, actually affect getting something as powerful as Apple Intelligence out the door? It can't just be about speed then.
No way. Think about the sheer power needed. Craig Federighi showed off all sorts of things at WWDC, language models for writing help, diffusion models for making images.
The cool generative stuff.
Running those kinds of models locally on your phone, that takes immense processing power, tons of memory, super fast data access, all happening right there. Srishanthanam even mentioned how critical the silicon is during the iPhone 16 reveal.
And sure, the new chips, the A18 and A18 Pro, they're beasts with those neural engines built for AI.
Even with that power, there are real physical limits, right? You've got battery life to worry about, heat. You can't just stick a supercomputer chip in a phone without consequences.
It'd melt or die in 5 minutes.
Pretty much. It's a tough balancing act within the device itself.
Which is totally different from the cloud approach, where companies just throw massive server farms at the problem.
Exactly. But that often comes with the trade-off we talked about, your data getting processed somewhere else, raising those privacy flags.
Right.
And this ties back to Federighi's point about privacy from the ground up. Apple's vision is personal intelligence AI that knows you without needing to scoop up all your personal data and send it off somewhere. It's meant to stay, well, personal.
Keeping the intelligence intelligently private.
Nice. And you mentioned iMessage encryption earlier, that PQ3 stuff. The whole point is that nobody, not even Apple, can read your messages in transit.
So it logically follows that if you want that same level of privacy for AI processing your personal info, you got to keep the data and the number crunching close by on the device.
Precisely. And what's really interesting is seeing how they're exploring ways to handle situations where maybe some server interaction is needed, but without giving up privacy. That paper on homomorphic encryption, PIR, PNNS.
Okay, alphabet soup time. HEPIR. What do those actually do in simple terms?
Right. So think of homomorphic encryption, HE, like this. Your phone encrypts your data, sends the locked box to a server. The server can do calculations on the locked box without ever opening it to see what's inside.
Seriously, it can work on encrypted data.
Yep. Then it sends the still locked results back, and only your device has the key to unlock it. It's a way to get server help without exposing the raw data, and they're aiming for post-quantum security with it too, looking way ahead.
Wow, okay, that sounds incredibly complex to implement.
It is very complex. And this pulls us right back to the rollout timing. There's this unavoidable trade-off to rush out AI features or take the time to build in these robust on-device privacy-preserving methods.
It's not just about coding the AI. It's optimizing it for mobile hardware and wrapping it in these advanced privacy layers.
Exactly. It's a massive engineering lift.
Yeah.
Requires tons of optimization, tons of testing.
Which loops back to those initial takes.
Yeah.
Marquise Brownlee, MKBHD, mentioned this in a video, right? The immense pressure on all tech companies to just show something, anything,
Yeah.
on the AI front.
Yeah, the pressure is definitely real. And looking ahead, getting to that ultimate vision of powerful, private AI, it's going to demand constant progress on both fronts. We'll need even smarter, more efficient chips.
And more refined AI algorithms that can do amazing things without needing server farm levels of power, all while respecting privacy.
Exactly. The long game.
So that analogy you used earlier, the miniature secure data center in your pocket, with super strict access rules, that feels pretty apt for on-device processing.
I think it captures the essence. And while this path might mean a slower start for some flashy features, the end result could be an AI experience users feel they can genuinely trust. More secure, more private in the long run.
So wrapping this up then, it feels like the narrative that a slower Apple Intelligence release signals poor leadership. Well, it might be missing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
When you dive into Apple's history, their security focus is especially on encryption and keeping things on the device. It points strongly towards significant technical challenges being the main hurdle.
Yeah, the sheer computational demands and the complexity of doing this privately and efficiently on mobile hardware, those are likely the real drivers behind this.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? In this AI gold rush, is Apple's deliberate privacy-first strategy the winning move long-term? Even if it means competitors seem faster out of the gate.
It's a fundamental question.
What do you value more as a user? That ironclad on-device privacy, or getting the absolute latest AI trick right this second? Definitely something for all of us to consider.
Absolutely. And hey, if you want to dig even deeper into Apple's side of things, their support pages on iCloud security and the Apple Security Research blog have a ton more detail on the technologies and their overall approach. Worth a read.
Okay, so what do we know so far? We know Apple has this really strict privacy stance, which has been celebrated for years, but it appears that it's both a shield as well as a shackle in the AI arms race. We're also starting to see how Apple's secretive, perfectionist approach slows down innovation in fast-moving fields like AI. And it's been suggested by one of my favorites, Marquise Brownlee, that this second mover approach, which is a reasonable strategy and used by lots of companies in lots of different areas, may not be a good strategy at all when it comes to artificial intelligence. Yes, it could work in hardware arenas as Apple gets most of its income from. If you say, hey, I'm going to let other people figure out how to build a cell phone and then maybe even how to build a smartphone and then look at it and be like, this is pretty good, but I'm going to make the whole thing glass and make it beautiful and make it all work together with my own software. Then boom, you've invented the iPhone and you did it as a second mover, slow to the market. You weren't up there when BlackBerry was beating everyone down, but guess what? iPhone is the #1 phone in America and many parts of the world by a large margin, and BlackBerry, we don't talk about BlackBerry anymore. And yes, if you're curious, they still do exist, but they stopped support for every single phone in 2022 and now just focus on things like cybersecurity and services. And in what has to be one of the most painful decisions from a company like Apple to make, we of course have the infamous partnership between them and OpenAI. Not infamous in any sort of activities that we wouldn't approve of, but just the fact that as we approach WWDC, the Worldwide Developers Conference of 2024, just a few weeks before that was announced this huge partnership where Apple and ChatGPT would then get along. Meaning, ChatGPT would handle the more advanced requests because whatever tools Apple had at that point, they didn't really work. And speaking of features that didn't really work, let's take a look. Now, we're not going to go all the way back to WWDC, but to their actual Apple event later that fall, because this shows at a higher level what they promised to actually put on the devices. So let's talk a little bit about the problem statement. I don't want to belabor the point because you all have iPhones and you've all been hearing about it, how Apple has, quote, dropped the ball for so long. But let's just look at some of the features that were promised as a reminder of where we're still trying to get.
Let's take a look at 4 ways Apple Intelligence will transform so much of what you do with your iPhone, like how you communicate and express yourself, starting with writing tools. We're deeply integrating them into iOS, making them accessible virtually everywhere you type. So you'll be able to rewrite hastily written notes into a polished dinner party invite.
Okay, and I think that this one is probably the one that it seems like a great benefit of AI, and you can do it. It is available now on the iPhone, but in terms of applications for our life, we have things that are kind of featurey, and then things that are groundbreaking or high quality of life improvement opportunities. And that's what we want. We want to streamline our lives. We want to have a better workflow. The rewriting stuff can help. I do think the interface is too clunky, but let's still look at how the technology should work.
Adjust the tone of that Slack message to your boss to sound a little more professional. Or proofread your latest review on Goodreads before posting it to your fellow bookworms. Though sometimes the best way to get your point across isn't with words, it's with emoji. And you'll be able to create new emoji simply by typing a description, giving you the perfect response for your group thread.
Okay, and so here he promises that you can type cowboy frog into your Genmoji. It's a cool looking cowboy frog. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can also see this as we're moving along through the episode. But if you're listening on Apple Podcasts and you just got the audio, it's a frog that has cowboy boots on. And I got to say, they missed the cowboy hat. I mean, he's wearing a vest. He's wearing boots, but he also has sunglasses on that look like Ray-Bans. I don't know if that was the final polish that we were looking for, but it's the one that they chose for this demo, and theoretically it could work. Not a big feature that we use, but the first one to the Apple market. Let's keep going.
With endless possibilities, you could let your imagination run wild, or create fun original images with Image Playground. Along with a new dedicated app on iPhone, it'll be integrated right into apps like Messages. Next, iPhone holds so many of your photos, and Apple Intelligence will give you brand new ways to relive precious memories.
And so remember this as he's going to talk through some of the benefits, because Apple Photos is a great compare and contrast to the real problem behind Apple Intelligence.
Suppose you've got a photo in mind that you took ages ago, but can't remember exactly when or where. Just describe it by typing something like Shawnee dancing in a red dress, and Apple Intelligence will find it for you. It even works for getting straight to a specific moment in a video. You'll also be able to create an entire movie to revisit a favorite memory.
Now, these are really important features. As someone who teaches this type of content every single day to classes and groups and individuals, we actually have a photo-specific class that we teach. We try to migrate people who have been used to organizing their photos in albums, meaning either digitally or physical albums that they have around their house or in a cupboard somewhere, and they took all these photos as they were on vacation, and then they came home and they picked out the best ones after they got developed, and they put in some albums, and then this is the photo album for the family trip to Bermuda in 2019. Okay, now that is a good way to do it, but it's not the best way, not anymore, because taking all that time to organize your photos can be just better spent letting Apple search your photos, figure out where you were in Bermuda, and then if you just search the word Bermuda, boom, you got everything you need. Now, what he's talking about, I was very excited when we first saw it because I wanted to be able to really drive home the point that manual album organization is gone, search is in. That's all you need is search. And the Apple Intelligence that's promised here would have made my point, the point of Mr. Mac as a company and the classes that we teach, even more powerful. So I like this, and it uses something called visual lookup, which has been around on iPhone for a long time. All the way back to iOS 16, we started seeing that technology that maybe Apple Sherlocked a few companies because these other companies had figured out how to identify a tulip. If you point your camera at the picture and you get a tulip, and then you wouldn't make a mistake like I did when I was shopping for flowers and accidentally bought lilies instead of tulips for Easter Sunday, which my wife is allergic to, so that was a whole thing. I would have benefited tremendously using visual lookup, but now we have this other thing that Craig is talking about in this release of the Apple event, September of last year, because Apple cranked it up in terms of the performance and also how that information is processed, because visual lookup supposed to happen on the device. Now we have enhanced visual search. So Apple is in this situation where they're like, hey, we need to get more information to help people identify plants and landmarks, to do what he just demoed here, which is to actually pull out someone doing back handsprings in the middle of a video. That is an incredible promise. But in order to achieve it, you have to have, at least in 2025 and probably 2026, off-device processing. You got to send these videos to some sort of supercomputer that can quickly go and find and identify where everyone is doing backflips and back handsprings and somersaults. So far, they've achieved that with the more advanced version of the visual lookup now being enhanced visual search. And this is accomplished by a new type of encrypted sharing called homomorphic encryption. And also, there's other versions of this called SHE for somewhat homomorphic encryption. So that's the technology behind what Craig is describing here. And it's really the turning point of why Apple has not been able to crack the Apple intelligence, the artificial intelligence conversation and feature set, because they're so committed to that privacy. Just a few months ago, Apple released PQ3, or post-quantum 3 encryption, for their Apple iMessaging service. And this was hailed as an incredible achievement. We are concerned somewhat that sometime in the future, our traditional encryption methods may be crackable by one of these supercomputers, these quantum computers that are starting to be developed in labs like the one of Google. Amazing technology and breakthroughs coming with quantum computers, but standard encryption, 256-bit or 128-bit encryption, is basically a giant math problem that is unsolvable by any modern computer because it would just take them too long. They could theoretically solve it, but it would take on the order of 50 billion years for some supercomputer there trying to calculate what the answer to the math problem could be. But quantum computers can theoretically do it in much less time because they can hold additional states like neither a 1 nor a 0, but a superposition in between state. And that allows them to solve very difficult problems like potentially opening up encrypted messages. So here they are celebrating how no one, not even Apple, can get into your messages. And don't take it from me. Let's look at the iCloud Data Security Overview page on apple.com that gets into the details of standard data protection versus advanced data protection. Now, by default, just regular standard protection for your iPhone has encryption, either 128 or 256-bit encryption for every single service on there. So your iCloud emails, that's if you have a @me.com or an @icloud.com, or for those old timers, @mac.com email address, your contacts, your calendars, your iCloud backup, your iCloud Drive, all your files and folders, your photos, your notes, your reminders and your voice memos, all of those things are encrypted when they're set up with standard encryption, which is what your iPhone probably has, unless you've made changes that we're about to discuss. But the key to unlocking and solving that math problem for the encryption is held by Apple. They could go in, use that key in order to show you this information. And they do that for making things available to you outside of your end-to-end device, like on iCloud.com. It can be very helpful to have Apple hold that key because if you lose your password or you need help recovering it, they can help you with that. But we have another option where you can turn on advanced data protection and have your data end-to-end encrypted. So for those users with advanced data protection, and we can see here right on Apple's website, that end-to-end encrypted data can be decrypted only on your trusted device. That's your iPhone or your iPad when you're signed into your Apple account. No one at all can access your end-to-end encrypted data, not even Apple. And this data remains secure even in the case of data breaches in the iCloud. And then there's the big asterisk here at the end. If you lose access to your account, only you can recover this data using your device passcode, password, recovery contact, or recovery key, which, by the way, we also teach a class on recovery contacts. It can be very helpful to have a family member enabled to set up to recover some of this data were your device to go missing. Because if you lose your device, all right, let's say you lose your computer, you can hop on Live or Outlook.com and go get your emails, right? But you won't be able to regain access to anything that's end-to-end encrypted. The end part there means that only devices at the end of the cloud experience, so your iPhone or your iPad, are able to decrypt that information. And not only is it on for all the services that I just mentioned if you turn on this advanced data protection, but it is already on under standard data protection, which you almost certainly have on. If you're not sure of what I'm talking about, you have on standard data protection, and it's the one we recommend. We don't recommend turning on advanced data protection for reasons that are about to be clear, if they're not already, about potentially losing your data if you lose access to the device. And end-to-end is already on for things that you might expect need higher levels of security, like your passwords, your health data, your journal data. The new journal app is end-to-end encrypted. Your home data is end-to-end encrypted. And then maybe most importantly, the messages in your iCloud are end-to-end encrypted. And not only that, we're also seeing this new PQ3 encryption. So the point here being, Apple does not have access to be able to decrypt these services. So when we got Craig Federighi on here talking about, hey, great news, we can use Apple AI in order to access all of these different services and go into your apps and say, hey, tell me about that message that my brother reminded me of last week. They actually can't, at least for the services that are end-to-end encrypted. And there is a commercial that Apple actually pulled off the internet where they had a actress at a party who saw someone across the room that she could not remember his name, pulled out her phone and said, hey, who did I have lunch with last week? And her calendar showed her the guy's name was Zach. And so she said, hey, Zach. And he goes, oh, I can't believe you remember my name. That's so cool. Well, Apple Intelligence saved the day. Now, as I already mentioned, the calendar app is on the list of applications that Apple has the encryption key to. But guess what? Apple pulled that commercial. You cannot find it anymore underneath their page. They have a whole bunch of things that Apple Intelligence can do, but it basically centers around rewriting your emails for you to make you look super smart in the office. The calendar one, they theoretically could get access to that calendar, but they would have to process it on device. And that's the piece that is potentially a big deal because AI uses a tremendous amount of energy relative to regular computations that we're going to have to account for. How is Apple going to get this stuff to where it can be processed on the device because it's end-to-end encrypted? Now, there are basically two solutions. One, we've already touched on very briefly, and I'll describe this because it's super technical, and maybe we'll do a deep dive on it even further later. But homomorphic encryption is probably Apple's way out of this. We talked about it with our AI guys near the beginning of the show. Basically, you can take encrypted data and have your model still perform mathematical functions on that data without decrypting it. Now, it seems to someone who has a user interface experience and skill level like myself that eventually you could train an AI model like the one you're using to decipher what is inside of the encrypted information. If you can work mathematical operations on it because there's some sort of relationship between the ciphertext and the plain text, then it seems like you could kind of reverse engineer that back to what the actual data is. That's the main concern that comes from me. Have to assume, though, that they've already thought about that and that doesn't actually work. It's too confusing, at least pre-quantum computers, in order to do that. So what that means is that if Apple is able to achieve this off-device processing for all of these very advanced AI functions that are end-to-end encrypted user data on the iPhone, then they're going to have to do it through homomorphic encryption and find some really, really complicated ways in order to achieve that. So maybe they can do that. Difficult road. The other road is to make AI way more energy efficient because right now the amount of energy it takes to run these computations is massive. To be fair, it's mostly about the training where there's the huge power suck. The training on the models where it runs through all that data takes a tremendous amount of power. And then after that, it's less. But I was looking at some stats earlier, and someone was saying that when they do on-device AI for image generation, their card, meaning their graphics card, that's something that your phone doesn't have a separate graphics card, but let's just say it had a graphics card almost as powerful as the one that was in this guy's computer. It was pulling about 200 watts for about 7.5 seconds while it put the image together. So 200 watts. There's no way your phone, I mean, even really impressive self-built PCs usually have a power supply of about 175 watts. Like 120 maybe, like is a pretty standard computer. Like 175 will be your power supply if you're really like going to be gaming. So a 200 watt power supply, or his was probably 250 and it cranks all the way up to 200. Like even if your phone could produce that, your battery is going to be done in about 45 minutes every single day. And these are generalizations on the time. We'll sit down with a deep dive on someone else who can actually run calculations. But that is the problem. That is the chokehold. There's just not the power, both by the chip. I mean, we got an A17 chip or an A18 chip. It doesn't matter. It's not going to be able to produce these calculations that we're talking about with actual AI level quality. You know, it's really going to have to be something that there is a breakthrough in how much power is required to run these AI, whether it's artificial intelligence, Gemini, Apple intelligence level calculations, to give you something usable in a reasonable amount of time. If you were going to ask Siri to tell you who you had lunch with last Thursday at 12:30, and you're waiting for like that commercial could have gone completely different, because like she asked Siri on who she had lunch with and it tells her, and then the guy walks around the corner like the next second. So if you were to wait for 5 minutes, seems a little extreme, but let's just say 20 seconds in order for AI to run all that and try to understand what you're saying and then put it back out in a format that's at a level of ChatGPT or greater, then that's too long. That's not going to be usable. And if that's what the results that the Apple engineering team was seeing when they were trying to run these computations on device, then no wonder they shut it down. No wonder that we're delayed almost an entire year. Apple has got itself between a privacy rock and a hard place, where you have two solutions out of this. Well, let's define the problem statement one more time. The thing that we want to have happen on our device is for us to talk to it and for it to know enough about us to have a useful conversation to make our lives more productive. The equivalent would be Jarvis in Iron Man. Tony Stark, his AI, Jarvis, it knows everything about him. It kind of knows his preferences. It knows how he talks, and it can banter with him, and it knows his schedule and the stuff he has coming up. When he says call Pepper, it knows who Pepper is, and it's a very seamless experience, and there's not a lot of extra explanation or really working to frame your prompts where you have to talk in a specific way. And what's the problem with that? Well, for companies like Google, there's no problem, because they can go in, get all your contacts and your messages and your pictures and your calendar events and your notes that you have in Google Keep, and they'll just read it. And then they'll have the Gemini supercomputer back in California process it all. And then if you ask it a question, send it right back. It takes a few milliseconds, easy peasy. But Apple has decided, out of an abundance of caution, for literally the last 15 years, they introduced this end-to-end encryption as part of their service in 2011. So let's say 13 years they've been doing this. And if you want to ask it like, hey, how am I doing with my health? How can you talk to me about the journal entry I put in yesterday? Hey, are the lights on at home right now? All of these have to be processed on device. And the biggest one, of course, is just going to be iMessage, because that's where so much of your information is when it comes to planning, navigating throughout your day, going to events, getting those updates that Apple keeps talking about, where it's like, you're like, dinner's at 7 and you're thinking, okay, good. But then it's like, hey, everyone moved it to 7:30 while you weren't paying attention to your phone. And the group text, the summary is 7:30 now. You have 30 extra minutes. That kind of stuff has to happen on device. And it seems like making your iMessages into a little summary, not that hard. Okay, it's just a simple language model that you can do on device. But all of this other stuff where we actually can get some use out of this, too difficult to do on device. So we either have to make it way more efficient with way more advanced algorithms and way more advanced hardware that we don't have yet, or we got to figure out this homomorphic encryption thing where somehow they can take your encrypted information and tell you everything you need to know about it without actually learning about what's inside of it. Now, that seems like a long putt. There is something called zero proof. Uh-oh, I just forgot the name of it. Let me look it up. Yeah, there it is. Okay, it's something called zero knowledge proof, where you can actually communicate information without you can confirm the information without telling the other party in the transaction anything about your actual stuff, and they have to believe you because you've set it up in that sort of way. And this is a mathematical concept. So the math kind of exist in order to achieve this. But Apple, I believe, is in a really tough situation because there's a third option that we haven't talked about yet. Option number one, just totally advance us 10 years, 5 years maybe, in terms of AI chips and efficiency. Number two, figure out how to read encrypted data without decrypting it. Or number three, ask your user base if it's cool if they just decrypt your stuff and use it to make your calendar scheduling more fluid. Like, those are the three options. And I do want to say that the third option, technically, apparently not that hard, because the advanced data protection that we talked about earlier that encrypts all of this stuff. Okay, all this stuff being, if you're watching on YouTube, iCloud Mail and contacts and calendars and iCloud Drive, which is your files and your photos and your notes, it will encrypt all of that at a higher level. But if you change your mind and you don't want it end-to-end encrypted anymore, you put in your recovery key and it undoes it. So there's some data transfer in there, but it's not that hard to hand that key back. Okay, from when Apple gives it to you only on your device for you to give it back by putting in that recovery key. So they could set up something similar in iOS 19 to decrypt the rest of this information. But as a final thought, that's where I was going to kind of end everything. Like, here's the challenge, and really just kind of say that Apple is in a really hard spot. But I was talking to someone on staff here, and they were telling me that they really thought that the commitment to privacy in the long run was going to pay off. And this is a little bit different than my take on the market. I was kind of surprised because he's younger than me, and I see the young people being more willing to give up their data, right? If you didn't grow up with a cell phone, let's say, and you got a cell phone later in life, you're like, okay, I'm not just giving away my passwords, etc. And so I was surprised to hear that he thought that actually people are going to want it. They're going to want their privacy, and they're going to want it long term, and they're going to want it for real. And so I hope for Apple's sake that he's right. I don't know how Apple's going to solve it. Again, we still have the main problem of the important information being encrypted on people's devices. But if the market really doesn't like this open source approach to their data, yes, I misused that word for a second, not open source in terms of coding, but open to your parenting company in terms of your data management, then that's good. That's good for Apple, because the two solutions that I'm talking about, they will happen. It will get more efficient and cheaper to process AI models as they grow. And there's already all kinds of new things out where they have smaller models that then hand off to larger models. And all of this will occur. So if there's going to be one company that holds on to the value of privacy at a point where the market really cares about it, then Apple's going to make a full recovery from this and then some. All right, that's it, man. You guys have a great rest of your week. We'll check out our YouTube video coming next week. That's going to get even more into depth than this, with all kinds of pictures and graphs and a more focused approach to a very complicated topic. Bless y'all.